welcome to the Fat Monk Podcast. Tales of meeting an unorthodox Daoist and his friends amongst the mountains and waters of China. Written by Xiaoyao Xingzhe and read by Nick Dent.
Chapter 8. In a Daoist Circle. A caption to an illustration in the Xing Ming Gui Zhi, The Principles of Essence and Life, reads, "When eyes do not see, Hun returns to the liver. When ears do not hear, Jing is in the kidneys. When the tongue is still, Shen is in the heart. When there is no awareness of odor, Po is in the lungs. When these four do not leak, Jing water, Shen fire, Hun wood, and Po metal all collect in the center, harmoniously." It's cruel, in my opinion. What is? Xiaojing was pruning a bonsai, bending her tall body, studying the branches and making occasional precise clips. We were in the upper room of Shijie's restaurant, waiting for the others. I had wanted to turn on the heater, but she had objected that the room would soon warm. It's cruel to force what could be a beautiful large tree to live in such a cramped and confined space. She just looked at me and rolled her eyes. "What?" I said. "You think I'm being over-sentimental?" "Not at all. I think you are being deliberately stupid, trying to annoy me." I frowned. Frankly, I didn't have a clue what she meant. "You really don't understand, do you? Well, Shijie encourages us to look and think about what we see around us. You have heard of Wu Yan Zhi Jiao, silent teaching? You've been around us long enough to know that, at least." She brushed up the snippings. The silence grew awkward. Finally, she turned to me and said, "All right, if you must be told, that bonsai is us. We live cut off from our deepest source of nourishment, that which would allow us to grow into our greatest potential." She emptied the snippings into a container designed for the compost and then continued, "Society trains us, constrains us, forces us to direct our energies into certain narrowly defined directions. Yes, it's cruel, terrible, like I said. But there is more. Silent teaching is never just one side. It's always a whole, multidimensional. For example, here we have a chance to see that sometimes training and restraint can lead to extraordinary beauty, that submission to a higher design brings out abilities we would never naturally develop, and that we can turn for our nourishment from a lower to a higher source. So, which is right?" Xiaojing's voice rose. "I don't know what makes you so dumb, but it really works. If you're—" "What's all the noise?" Shijie swept in, leading a train of her disciples, most of whom worked there at the restaurant. A few, however, were removing outdoor winter jackets and scarves. They fanned out around the room, arranging tables and setting the chairs into a rough circle. "Shijie, it's nothing, only Xiaoyao." "I know he annoys you," Shijie said. "That's why I asked you to look after him when I found out Fatty couldn't make it. Now, I want you to turn to him and thank him sincerely for helping to refine yourself." "But Shijie—" Xiaojing stopped as Shijie gave her a steady look. Then, pressing her lips together, turned to me, bowed, and said quickly, "Thank you for making me a better person." She then spun on her heel and crossed the room, put as much distance between us as possible. The other disciples settled themselves into a circle, some on chairs, some on the floor, while Shijie pulled a cushion into the center. "As the harmony of this room has been somewhat disturbed," she said, sitting, "after our usual several minutes of opening silence, I want to go through the Guān, the white bone contemplation, just the short version, before the subgroup begins their look at the Xing Ming Gui Zhi. She looked around. All right, settle down and remember to extend yourself toward contact with that spirit that moves with the Tao. The chair scrapings and rustlings gradually ceased, and we sank into silence. I had no idea how to extend myself toward contact with that spirit, so I simply deepened my breathing, quieted my internal dialogue somewhat, and tried to assume an attitude of openness. After 3 or 4 minutes, Shijie began to speak in a calm voice, modulated to just reach every part of the room. The Bai Gu Guān, for those who have not done it before, is a contemplation in your mind's eye of the human skeleton in as much detail as possible. In the old days, my teacher told me, it was not uncommon to find an old battlefield with skeletons everywhere. All one had to do was sit on a rock or a log and study one, memorizing every bend and crack, turning away and visualizing, locating unclear areas in your mind, and going back until it was better than a photograph. It was three-dimensional. One should be able to examine the skeleton in your mind's eye from all angles with incredible accuracy. She looked around at the silent circle. The windows were shaded, but the light of the evening sun crept through the gaps, tinging the room blood red. All right, let's start. Imagine the space between your eyebrows, yin tang, and the brows themselves, no flesh covering the bones. Look carefully how white and clean the bones of the skull are. She paused for the space of a breath. Now move to the eye sockets, just under the bumps of the brows. No flesh, no eyeballs, just deep round crevices extending back into the skull. Another breath. Now see how between the eye sockets there's a hole where the nose would be. Just a short bone there, no cartilage, just empty. Slightly longer pause. To either side, the cheekbones stretch around, back to the bones around the ear canal. No ears, just a hole. Her voice had become a soothing drone. Contemplate the bones on the back of the skull, moving up to the vertex at Bai Hui, then down again to yin tang in between the eyes, to the eye sockets, to the cheekbones. As she went on, Shijie's voice slowed, each instruction leaving plenty of time to view the structure in question, imagining in detail each part of the skeleton, from the skull down to the vertebrae of the neck, clavicle, the scapula, the thoracic vertebrae, the ribs in order, the sternum. Then she went back up to the humerus, down to the radius and ulna, the bones of the wrist, the metacarpals, the phalanges. When her voice stopped, it was a long time before I opened my eyes. My whole body tingled from the force of attention that had been poured into it, and it felt as if the room itself had been energized. Many of the people in the circle sat with their eyes half closed. Some of them had them open and were looking at Shijie. There was a solemn silence. Any questions? The young girl on the other side of the room, next to Xiaojing, cleared her throat, then asked, "There are differences between a man's skeleton and a woman's. Does it matter which we visualize?" "A woman ideally should visualize a woman's skeleton," Shijie said. "Harder to find on a battlefield, though." Her mild jest lightened the atmosphere of the room. She continued, "But it's about the same these days. Audio-visual replications are okay, but if you can find the real thing, it is more effective." One of the men in the circle, who wore a stained kitchen apron and looked like a cook, said, "When should we use this contemplation? You have taught us that we should be turning the light around and looking back into the source of mind, whatever we are doing throughout the day. But this seems quite different and specific." "Yes," Shijie said, "this is quite specific and not something to which you want to habituate yourself. In fact, ideally, you end up dissolving that skeleton away completely and your sense of self with it." She looked around, then continued, But the expedient use of this contemplation is very valuable. For instance, when you find yourself unable to settle your mind or distracted by desires, especially sexual desires. There was a rustling across the room. The young girl next to Xiaojing seemed to have nudged her. But Shijie continued, and that is why it's best for men to visualize a male skeleton and women a female skeleton. Unless you're gay, the girl spluttered. I saw Xiaojing inch away from her, but there was low laughter around the room. Shijie smiled too. Naturally, you use your common sense and do what it takes to achieve your aim. You want to lessen your fixation, not increase it. She stood up and directed the rest of us to do likewise. We all stretched for a few moments. I turned to the older woman next to me and was just about to make small talk when she shook her head and put her hand by her chest, palm facing me. It seemed clear it was preferable to stay in tune with the group mind rather than split into individual discussion. Later, I was to see that two-person interchanges were not uncommon, but that they tended to express the questions or concerns of the group as a whole, basically bringing them out of the group's subconscious for general observation and sometimes for explicit comment by Shijie. At the moment, however, people around the room seemed to maintain an awareness of everyone else, a presence within the whole. Shijie signaled everyone to sit down again and said, Ling Ling's comment is quite useful as a reminder that eyes are the key to this work. All of the basic texts have statements like this. Lao Tzu said, refusing to look at the desirable makes your heart peaceful. But pay attention here. It's not that you put a lot of effort into refusing to look at desirable things. That just makes you more fixated on those things. The cook indicated a desire to speak, and Shijie nodded slightly. When I was younger, I studied with a Daoist who quoted the Yin Fu Jing, which says, the mechanism is in the eyes. But he said that this meant that every time you inhaled, you swiveled your eyes upward, and every time you exhaled, you rolled your eyes downward. There were a few chuckles around the circle, but I had heard or read something similar and was not sure. The Book of Balance and Harmony says that there are 3,600 side paths, and we should aim at the highest practice. Here, we can actually find a useful quote in the book that a few of us will be starting to look at tonight, the Xing Ming Gui Zhi. In the chapter called The First Oral Teaching, it says, the heart is the pivotal mechanism, but eyes are the robber. When desire subverts the heart, it first captures the eyes. Xiaojing asked, what does it mean? The heart is the pivotal mechanism. Shijie smiled. Good question. To really get this, you need to understand that we as individuals are composed of layers and levels. Some layers more material and gross, others more subtle. The more we turn towards the world with our mind and heart, the more we are pulled towards that gross material realm. When we turn the light around, we are turning towards the more subtle realm. In the beginning, all is darkness there, but as we pay attention into it, it begins to open up for us. This is how we accumulate that energy that helps us approach the Tao. Oh, I get it, Ling Ling said. So it is our heart that decides to look inward or outward, and that is why it is the pivot. Yes, said Shijie. Of course, we use the eyes to do that, actually or metaphorically, so you could just as well say that the mechanism is in the eyes. If you are not careful, though, the eyes take over, and suddenly all that is just pouring outward through them. She turned to me. Xiaoyao, didn't the abbot tell you something about that? He said that when we look at something, we should draw their essence and spirit inward through our eyes. Don't pour our own essence and spirit outward. I thought for a moment. There was something more. What was it? Oh, yes. He said to be careful about what we look at like this. What do you think he meant by that? I didn't know what to say at first. I heard Xiaojing snicker on the other side of the room and felt my cheeks grow hot. Finally, I said, I think he meant that we can open ourselves deeply to bad influences, and so we should learn to use our discernment. For example, what do you think, Xiaojing? Shijie must have heard the snicker. Xiaojing sat up straight and said with composure, I think he meant we can and should look deeply at things that have a natural beauty, like trees or flowers, things that possess like certain rock formations. We should be careful of man-made things, unless they are artifacts made by skilled artisans who put love into their work, or artists who have a natural and cultivated link with the Tao. So she'd already thought about this. I had to admit I was surprised. Ling Ling, next to her, chimed in, advertising, factory-made plastic junk, horror movies, porn. There was a general rumble of agreement. Yes, Ling Ling is right. These are definitely things to avoid if you are opening yourself to outside influences, Shijie said. And it is worse than you may think. We each of us are portals into the general mind of humanity. Humanity is one big organism. And what we pay attention to finds its way into that mind, enriching it or poisoning it, as the case may be. So our actions do not just affect ourselves. There was a stirring around the circle. Members looked at each other, disturbed. On the other hand, Shijie continued, as my teacher told me, many of our impulses and thoughts also well up from that same source. So when we have bad or evil thoughts, that does not mean you are evil. These can well up in anybody, even saints. The important thing is whether you allow those thoughts to remain, or even worse, invite them in and feed them. She turned and picked up a book lying next to her cushion, opened it in the middle and flipped a few pages, then pointed with her finger. It is as this quote says, "Do not fear the arising of thoughts, only fear noting them too slowly. The arising of thought is the sickness, and here is the cure. Don't follow them through." That quote is contained in the Xing Ming Gui Zhi. Most of you know this book well. After our break, those of you who are already familiar with it can leave or work on your own practice separately. I'll work with a subgroup that is going to look at it in detail, Xiaoyao, Ling Ling, and Xiaojing. She rose gracefully to her feet. But first, let's have some tea. Xiaojing and the young girl Ling Ling sat with Shijie and I at a table. The room had emptied except for one or two people sitting on cushions in different corners. Shijie turned to me. Did you have a look through the whole book as Shiji asked you to? Yes. What struck you? I thought for a moment, then said, the number of quotes from Confucian and Buddhist books, together with Daoist ones. When put together like that, they seem to all be referring to the same thing. Indeed, they do, for the most part. That is one reason this book is so valuable. They're all talking about the basic same experience, the experience of living a fully human life. And we can see how three different traditions from three different angles bring out distinct facets of certain aspects of being. She opened the book, found a page, and said, for example, in relation to what we were discussing before the break, here's a quote from a Buddhist scripture. Throughout the three realms, the mind is the master. Those who can observe the mind will attain liberation. Those unable to observe it will, in the end, sink. She looked down again at the book. Right next to that quote is this one from the Song Dynasty Confucian scholar Zhu Xi. He says, control the outside so as to nourish your inside. And next to this is a quote from the Analects of Confucius. If it is improper, don't look at it. Ling Ling rolled her eyes. Sounds like my parents. Shijie nodded. Yes, that's a problem nowadays. Many centuries of these Confucian sayings have been used to bludgeon people into submission, and they come with so much emotional baggage now that it's almost impossible to take advantage of their original intent. It's the same back in Europe, I said excitedly. The churches get involved in politics, torturing and killing while quoting scriptures, and now I have friends who can't even listen to a reading from the Bible without feeling sick. Xiaojing turned on me. What are you bringing them up for? We have our own problems. If you're so worried about them, why don't you go back where you came from? Ling Ling raised her eyebrows and looked back and forth between us, a slight smile on her lips. Shijie ignored the outburst, remaining silent and running her finger down the page. Xiaojing looked at her and murmured, "Sorry, Shijie," then turned to me and said, "Sorry," in such a low voice it was barely possible to make out the word. Ling Ling pursed her smiling lips and looked down. Shijie said, "It's getting late now. We have to look at some basic alchemical symbolism concerning trigrams and hexagrams. I know you have at least some familiarity with the concept, so I will be brief." Just then the double doors in the room opened and my friend the fat monk entered. He looked frazzled and exhausted and exchanged looks with Shijie as he sat. "Done?" she asked, and he grunted in return. He poured himself some tea, finished the leftover snacks the cook had made, and soon was back to his old self. Meanwhile, Shijie continued, "If you remember the line from the Tao Te Ching that says the Tao produces one, one produces two, two produces three, and the three produce the 10,000 things, it is all illustrated there for you in the trigrams. The undifferentiated Tao divides into single yin and yang lines. Those lines combine into two lines, and those combinations form three lines, the Bagua, which encompasses all changes. Remember that yin is dense and heavy, but also takes in and nourishes, allowing growth. Kun is the earth. Yang is immaterial, light, formless, but provides the impetus to start things. Yang sets things in motion. It is action. Qian is heaven. These two are known as the doorway to the I Ching, the mother and father of all the changes. And even if you are not interested in the I Ching, these are important for understanding alchemical symbolism as well. In the earliest dictionaries we have the word Guā, hexagram or trigram, is explained like this. Guā Zhi, Guāye. Guā means to hang, and Shijie stopped for a moment, then turned to the fat monk and said, "Do you remember, Shijie, when our teacher was telling us about these things for the first time?" He chuckled and his eyes brightened, like it was yesterday. That was the time we'd spent all day climbing. We'd reached a high point and were looking south when the clouds cleared. It was one of those rare evenings when the sun and the full moon were together in the sky, equally visible, and our teacher used the chants to describe the trigrams Qian, Kun, Li, and Kan. Shijie looked pensive. "Yes, I too remember most clearly. Perhaps it was the drama of the setting. Our teacher said that all the phenomena we see in the universe, everything there before us, was, as it were, a painting hung before us, a moving canvas of change. And everything we see can be encompassed by the symbols of the trigrams and hexagrams, sun, moon, wind, thunder, mountain, waterways. It's all there. But heaven is far above us, earth is solid beneath us, and all the realm of change happens between these two, the Qian and the Kun." They were both silent for a moment. We didn't really feel what he meant then, I think. He went on to talk about the sun and moon, particularly the two trigrams, Li and Kan. The fat monk said, "Yes, it was striking what he said. Those two things, the sun and the moon, are the biggest things we see." And there they were, hanging between heaven and earth, moving, circling, immense symbols of meaning forever in front of us and forever ignored. Without these two, there would certainly be no 10,000 things, or us either. He looked down, thinking, and then continued. Later, he explained that Li, the sun with the broken line in the middle, is the symbol of heaven brought down into the realm of changes by the shift of its middle line from yang to yin. Kan, the moon, is a piece of the earth lifted into the heavens by its middle line of yang. Xiaojing and Ling Ling looked at each other. Shijie glanced at the two girls and said, Our teacher went on to say that within the human body, Li symbolizes the eyes, while Kan stands for the ears. So when you are meditating, these two should be circulating inside. Ling Ling said, "Oh, it's like the story of Hundun." Xiaojing looked puzzled. "I know that one," I said proudly. "It's from Zhuangzi. Hundun was the ruler of the central kingdom and had two friends, hurried and heedless, who ruled the territories on the boundary of the central region. Hundun was very kind to them, and they wanted to repay him. So they said to each other, 'Everyone has holes to see, hear, eat, and smell, but our friend Hundun has none of these. Let's give him some.' So every day they drilled a hole in Hundun, and on the seventh day he died." Xiaojing looked even more puzzled. "What does that have to do with Li and Kan?" she asked me. Well, I said, "I just know the story. I didn't mean—" "Ban dan," Xiaojing said under her breath. Ling Ling smiled and said, "I don't know. I just suddenly had a flash of insight when Shijie was talking about the eyes as the sun and the ears as the moon circulating inside of us as we meditate. And I realized that the story of Hundun was showing a picture of self-contained wholeness, ruined when essence leaked out through the senses," she finished breathlessly. "Indeed. And the first chapter of the Xing Ming Gui Zhi, there's actually a short note from Zhuangzi referring to Hundun," said Shijie. "It's in this passage. People are born due to the generative forces of heaven and earth, and up until puberty, those forces remain fully young and pure. Who isn't virtuous and righteous at that age? But then a command is received from heaven, and those who wish to repay Hundun arrive, every day drilling a hole until the pure yang runs out, becoming yin in the second line. Thus Qian cannot remain pure yang, and becomes broken, turning into Li, and its middle yang line transfers to Kun, making it into Kan." "Oh, that's right," said Ling Ling. "Maybe I saw it there, and it stuck in my mind." "This will often happen," Shijie said. "It's a process of digestion. An undigested concept will keep coming up in ideas and questions, in dreams, until we absorb it and move on." "That's right," said the fat monk, glancing at me. "Some people keep asking the same questions over and over in different formats and never seem to take in the answer." Shijie continued, "And often they project those questions or problems onto the people around them rather than recognize them as aspects of themselves that are irritating them inside, asking to be cured." Ling Ling gave Xiaojing a pointed look. The fat monk said, "Anyway, to return to our topic, the trigram Li refers to the sun, but also to fire, to heat, and as we've said, to the eyes. The trigram Kan refers to the moon, but also to water, to cold, and as we've said, to the ears." My mind had started to cloud at that stage. The girls, by contrast, seemed to be taking it all in. The fat monk went on, "Kan, on the other hand, is kidney water, deep, quiet, storing potential, but with a point of yang within, deep in the pelvis. It is that yang which stirs when your vitality is aroused." Again he drew the lines on the table, 2 broken lines on the outside, 1 solid line inside. But Kan can also refer to the deep, quiet, original knowledge of the mind of Tao. I was now thoroughly confused by all the changes in the meaning of the symbols, and said so. "Change, fluidity, flow," said the fat monk. "That's what this is all about. A symbol can represent many things. The key, though, is that those things have common qualities. The symbol helps you look for that commonality." He chuckled. "The changes keep your mind flexible." We sat in silence for a few moments. The fat Daoist got up to refill the teapot. Shijie had her eyes closed, but then she opened them and said, "Shijie, we were talking before about the fundamental identity of the 3 religions, and the other day you were telling me something interesting you had found." What? He said, frowning as he returned to the table. About Zen and the symbols of the I Ching. Oh, yes, he turned to us. It's fascinating when you look behind the scenes a little. Way back in the 9th century, the Chan school of Caodong used the hexagrams to illustrate their doctrine, especially Dongshan. Teacups were replenished as he spoke. Dongshan talked about using the yang line of the trigram Kan to repair the hole in the middle of Li. Of course, this was referring to subtle aspects of meditation. Later, this became a very popular part of the golden elixir alchemy. But it started with, or at least was preserved by, the Chan people. They were more Daoist than the Daoists. Shijie chuckled softly, tilting her teacup to look at her tea and swirling it. It's getting pretty late, she said, so we better finish up. Just wanted to preview the topic for the next meeting so that you can roll it around in your minds. Remember that the 8 trigrams show more subtle variations and combinations of yin and yang than the 4 simple pairs of yang and yin lines can do. Likewise, the 6-lined hexagrams can again show more subtle aspects of change in the trigrams alone. She paused to sip her tea. To round off tonight, then, I just want to introduce you to the 12 sovereign hexagrams, the Bi Gua. We'll talk more about them next time. They clearly demonstrate ebb and flow, rising and falling, and are quite important for the alchemical work. I made a copy of this diagram showing their relation to the waxing and waning of the moon, and I'd like you to become familiar with them. Perhaps when you see the phase of the moon on clear nights, you can picture in your mind which hexagram that might be in the cycle of the Bi Gua. She handed them out and said, "All right, let's finish as we began, taking a moment or two in silence to extend ourselves toward contact with that spirit that moves with the Tao." On the street outside, it was cold and dark, and even though there was no snow, there were few passers-by. Shijie waited to lock the door while the fat monk retrieved his bicycle from the lower hallway. Ling Ling had wound a scarf around her neck and was zipping up her yellow down jacket. Xiaojing was wearing old-style mianao and studiously ignoring me. The 2 girls walked off arm in arm, then Ling Ling looked back over her shoulder to wink at me. Waves crash to and fro on the surface, but ocean currents run deep, the fat monk said cryptically as he threw his leg over his bike. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Fat Monk podcast, produced by Ben Thomas with music by Flora Carbo. Please like and subscribe and go to the show notes for links and further content. If you'd like to become a material supporter of the podcast, click on the coffee button at the bottom of the show notes.